The letter arrived on a rainy Seattle morning, its edges frayed, the handwriting unmistakably Aunt Clara's. Miles Carter, 25, stood frozen in his tiny apartment, the words on the page slicing through him like a betrayal he hadn't seen coming. I published your story, Miles. It's time the world knows your truth. His truth? Miles' hands trembled as he clutched the letter, his heart pounding with a mix of rage and disbelief. Aunt Clara, the woman who'd raised him after his parents died, had taken his private journals, raw, unfiltered accounts of his coming out as gay, and turned them into a book without his consent. The book, Light in the Shadows, was already climbing bestseller lists, her name emblazoned on the cover as editor, while his life was laid bare for strangers to dissect. Miles sank onto his couch, the city's gray drizzle mirroring the storm inside him. He'd trusted Clara, shared his fears, his first love, his heartbreak, all in those journals he'd left behind when he moved out at 18. Now, at 25, working as a barista and trying to piece together a life in Seattle's vibrant but unforgiving Capitol Hill, he felt exposed, violated. The world was reading his soul, and he hadn't even been asked. His phone buzzed. A text from his best friend, Javier Torres, 27, popped up. Yo, you okay? Saw the book trending on X. WTF is going on? Miles stared at the screen, his chest tight. Javier, a graphic designer with a knack for seeing through Miles' walls, had been there through every late-night panic attack, every moment of doubt. He deserved an explanation, but Miles didn't have one yet. He typed back, "Meet me at the bookstore, 7 p.m. He needed to see the book for himself, to hold the weight of his stolen story in his hands. The bookstore, Pages and Pride, was a haven in Capitol Hill, its shelves lined with queer stories and its walls adorned with local art. Miles arrived early, his hoodie damp from the rain, and found the display immediately. Stacks of light in the shadows, a glossy cover with a silhouette of a young man against a sunrise. His story, his pain, his love for a boy named Ethan in high school, the one who'd broken his heart. All of it printed for the world to gawk at. Javier arrived, his denim jacket slung over one shoulder, his dark eyes scanning Miles with concern. "You didn't know, did you?" he asked, voice low. Miles shook his head, picking up a copy. "She didn't even call me, Javi. Just published it. Like my life's some kind of inspirational cash grab." Javier's jaw tightened. "That's messed up. What are you gonna do?" Miles flipped through the pages, his eyes catching fragments of his own words. The night he came out to Clara at 16, terrified she'd reject him. The summer he fell for Ethan, their secret kisses in the park. The ache of Ethan's betrayal when he chose to stay closeted. It was all there, polished and packaged, but it felt like a stranger's story. "I don't know," Miles admitted, his voice cracking. "Part of me wants to sue her. Part of me wants to disappear." Javier placed a hand on his shoulder, warm and steady. "You don't have to decide tonight, but you're not alone, okay?" Miles nodded, but the weight of Clara's betrayal clung to him. That night he couldn't sleep. He scrolled through X, reading reviews of the book. Some called it heart-wrenching and authentic. Others called it exploitative. One post stopped him cold. "Clara Carter's book tour starts next week in NYC. Will the real Miles show up?" A book tour. Clara was out there, profiting off his life while he was stuck here, drowning in the fallout. Something snapped inside him. He wasn't going to let her control the narrative any longer. The next morning, Miles called Javier. "I'm going to New York," he said, voice steady for the first time in days. "I'm crashing her tour." Javier hesitated. "You sure? That's bold." "I'm done hiding," Miles said. "She wants to tell my story? Fine. But I'm telling it my way." The flight to New York was a blur of nerves and determination. Miles had scraped together every cent from his barista tips to buy the ticket, his backpack stuffed with clothes and a dog-eared copy of Light in the Shadows. Javier insisted on coming, citing moral support and his own curiosity about Clara's audacity. They landed at JFK, the city's chaos a stark contrast to Seattle's quiet drizzle. The first stop on Clara's tour was a sleek bookstore in Manhattan's West Village, its windows plastered with posters of the book. Miles' stomach churned as he and Javier slipped into the back of the crowded room. Clara stood at a podium, her silver hair swept into a bun, her voice warm and practiced as she read from his journals. "When Miles came out to me," she said, "I knew his story could inspire others. His courage, his vulnerability, it's universal." Miles clenched his fists. Courage? She'd stolen his voice, not amplified it. Javier nudged him, whispering, "You good?" "Not yet," Miles muttered. He waited until the Q&A, when Clara opened the floor to questions. Heart pounding, he stood, his voice cutting through the room. "Why didn't you ask me before publishing my life?" The room went silent. Clara's smile faltered, her eyes locking onto him. "Miles?" she whispered, then recovered. I wanted to share your strength with the world." "My strength?" Miles' voice shook with anger. "You took my journals, my private thoughts. You didn't even tell me." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Clara's face flushed. "I thought you'd be proud," she said, but her voice wavered. "Proud?" Miles stepped forward, holding up the book. "This isn't your story to tell. It's mine." The audience erupted in whispers, phones raised to capture the moment. Javier stood beside him, a silent anchor. Clara tried to respond, but Miles wasn't done. "I'm taking it back," he said. "Starting tonight." The bookstore buzzed with tension as Miles' words hung in the air. Clara's polished demeanor cracked, her hands gripping the podium like a lifeline. The audience, a mix of curious readers and literary enthusiasts, leaned forward, sensing a drama far juicier than the pages of Light in the Shadows. Miles felt Javier's hand brush his, a quiet reminder to breathe. "You've got this?" Javier whispered, his voice steady despite the chaos unfolding. Miles nodded, his resolve hardening. He hadn't planned exactly what to say, but standing there, facing Clara, he felt a fire he hadn't known he possessed. "I was 16 when I wrote those journals," Miles said, his voice carrying over the murmurs. "Scared, confused, trying to figure out who I was. You were supposed to protect me, Clara, not turn my pain into your paycheck." Clara's eyes glistened, but she held her ground. "Miles, I never meant to hurt you. I thought this would help people." "Help you? Help me?" Miles laughed bitterly. "You didn't even ask if I was ready for the world to know. You didn't ask if I wanted my first love, my heartbreak, splashed across bestseller lists." A woman in the audience raised her hand hesitantly. "So you're the real Miles? From the book?" Miles turned to her, his chest tight. "Yeah, and I didn't sign up for this." The room erupted in questions, voices overlapping. Clara tried to regain control, but the moderator, a wiry man with glasses, stepped in. "Let's take a break," he said, glancing nervously at Miles. "We'll resume in 10. As the crowd dispersed, Clara approached, her steps tentative. "Miles, can we talk? Privately?" Javier crossed his arms, protective. "You good with that, Miles?" Miles nodded, though his gut twisted. "Yeah, let's get this over with." In a small office behind the bookstore, Clara sat across from Miles, her hands clasped tightly. Javier leaned against the wall, silent but watchful. The air felt heavy, thick with years of unspoken truths. "I thought I was doing the right thing," Clara began, her voice soft. "When you left for Seattle, you were so lost. I found your journals in your old room, and they moved me. I thought sharing them could give others hope. Miles leaned forward, his eyes burning. You don't get to decide that for me. Those were my private thoughts, my fears, my love for Ethan. You had no right. Clara flinched. I know I should have asked, but I was afraid you'd say no. You were always so private, Miles. I thought this could be a way to show the world how strong you are. Strong. Miles' voice broke. I was a kid, Clara. I was terrified. And now I'm reliving it every time someone opens that book. Clara reached for his hand, but he pulled away. I'm sorry, she whispered. I'll stop the tour. I'll pull the book. Miles shook his head. It's too late for that. The book's out there. People are reading it. But I'm not letting you control the story anymore. He stood, Javier following suit. What's your plan? Javier asked as they left the office, the crowd's eyes trailing them. I'm joining the tour, Miles said, his voice firm. Every stop, every city. I'm telling my side. Javier's eyes widened, a grin breaking through. That's insane. I'm in. The next stop was Chicago, a sprawling bookstore in Wicker Park. Miles and Javier arrived a day early, crashing at a cheap Airbnb to strategize. Miles spent hours scrolling through X, reading reactions to the NYC confrontation. Some called him brave, others called him ungrateful. One post read, Miles Carter's taking back his narrative. This is the queer story we need. It gave him a flicker of hope, but the weight of exposure still pressed on him. Javier, sprawled on the couch, looked up from his sketchpad. You nervous about tomorrow? Terrified, Miles admitted, sitting beside him. But I can't let her speak for me. Not anymore. Javier set his sketchpad down, revealing a drawing of Miles at the NYC bookstore, his face fierce and alive. This is you, Javier said. Not the book, not Clara's version. This. Miles stared at the sketch, his throat tight. Javier had always seen him, even when he couldn't see himself. Their eyes met, and for a moment, the air felt charged, like the prelude to something unspoken. Miles looked away, his heart racing. Thanks, Javi, he said softly, for being here. Always, Javier replied, his voice warm. The Chicago event was packed, the crowd buzzing with anticipation after the NYC drama. Clara read from the book, her voice more subdued than before. Miles waited in the back, his stomach in knots. When the Q&A began, he stood again, this time with a plan. I'm Miles Carter, he said, his voice steady. The real Miles. And I'm here to tell you what Clara left out. He spoke about the fear of coming out in a small town, the joy of falling in love, the pain of Ethan's rejection. He spoke about Clara's betrayal, but also about the strength he'd found in reclaiming his voice. The crowd listened, rapt, some wiping tears. Clara sat silently, her face unreadable. Afterward, a young woman approached Miles, clutching a copy of the book. I'm queer too, she said, her voice trembling. Your story, it made me feel less alone. But hearing you tonight, that's what I needed. Miles' eyes stung. Thank you, he said. That's why I'm here. As the crowd thinned, Javier pulled him aside. You were incredible, he said, his hand lingering on Miles' arm. You're changing things. Miles smiled, the weight in his chest lifting slightly. For the first time, he felt like he was writing his own story. The tour rolled on, each city a new battleground for Miles to reclaim his narrative. In Minneapolis, he spoke about the shame he'd carried as a teen, the way Ethan's rejection had made him question his worth. In Denver, he shared the joy of finding community in Seattle, the nights at Pages and Pride where he'd felt truly seen. Each event drew bigger crowds, fueled by X posts and viral clips of his confrontations with Clara. But the weight of reliving his past was starting to wear him down. Javier noticed. On a chilly night in Portland, as they sat in a diner after another packed event, he pushed a plate of fries toward Miles. "You're running on fumes, man. Talk to me." Miles stared at the fries, his fingers tracing the edge of the table. "It's like I'm ripping open old wounds every night. And Clara, she's still out there, acting like she's the hero of this story." Javier leaned forward, his dark eyes searching. "You're the hero, Miles. You're the one showing up, being real. That's what people are connecting to." Miles managed a small smile. "You make it sound easy." "It's not," Javier said, his voice soft but firm. "But you're not doing it alone." Their hands brushed as they reached for the fries, and Miles felt a spark he couldn't ignore. He'd always known Javier was special. His humor, his loyalty, the way he could make Miles laugh even on the worst days. But lately, those feelings had shifted, growing into something deeper, something that scared him as much as it thrilled him. He pulled his hand back, clearing his throat. "What's next? Boston?" Javier nodded, but his eyes lingered, like he'd felt the spark too. "Yeah, big one. You ready?" Miles wasn't sure, but he nodded anyway. Boston was Clara's hometown, her biggest event yet. It felt like the climax of this strange, painful journey. The Boston bookstore was a grand, historic space with towering shelves and stained glass windows. The crowd was the largest yet, a mix of Clara's fans and Miles' growing supporters. Clara read a passage about Miles' first Pride parade, her voice thick with emotion. Miles stood in the back, Javier at his side, his heart pounding as he waited for his moment. When the Q&A began, he didn't hesitate. "I'm Miles Carter," he said, stepping into the aisle, "and I'm here to tell you what it really felt like to come out." He spoke about the fear of losing Clara's love, the way her acceptance had been a lifeline. He spoke about the betrayal of the book, but also about the unexpected strength he'd found on this tour. "I didn't choose to share my story," he said, his voice steady. "But now that it's out there, I'm using it to help others. Not for profit, for truth." The crowd erupted in applause, and for the first time, Clara didn't try to defend herself. She sat, head bowed, as Miles finished. When he stepped down, a teenage boy approached, his voice barely above a whisper. "I haven't come out yet," he said, "but hearing you, I think I can do it." Miles knelt to meet his eyes. "You can, and you don't have to do it alone." Javier squeezed his shoulder, pride in his gaze. "You're killing it," he whispered. After the event, Clara approached, her face etched with guilt. "Miles, I am stopping the tour after this. I was wrong. I see that now." Miles studied her, the woman who'd raised him, who'd loved him but hurt him so deeply. "I don't want you to stop," he said finally. "I want you to listen. To me. To others like me. If you're going to tell our stories, do it right." Clara nodded, tears spilling over. "I will. I promise." As she walked away, Javier turned to Miles. "You didn't have to be that kind to her." Miles shrugged. "She's family. Flawed, but family." Javier's smile was soft, almost shy. "You're something else, Miles Carter." That night, in their hotel room, the air felt different. Javier sat on the edge of his bed, sketching, while Miles paced, restless. Finally, he stopped, his heart racing. "Javi, can I tell you something?" Javier looked up, setting his sketchpad aside. "Always." Miles took a deep breath. I think I'm falling for you." The words hung between them, heavy and electric. Javier's eyes widened, then softened. "Took you long enough," he said, a grin breaking through. He stood, closing the distance between them, and for the first time, Miles didn't pull away. Their kiss was tentative at first, then fierce, a collision of fear and hope and everything they'd been holding back. When they pulled apart, Javier rested his forehead against Miles. "We're writing this story together now," he whispered. Miles laughed, tears in his eyes. "Yeah, we are." The final tour stop was San Francisco, a city that felt like a homecoming for Miles. The Castro district pulsed with life, its rainbow flags waving proudly above the bookstore where Clara's last event would take place. Miles and Javier arrived early, their hands brushing as they walked through the vibrant streets. Since Boston, their connection had deepened, a quiet promise growing between them. But Miles couldn't shake the feeling that this stop would be a reckoning. For him, for Clara, for the story they were both trying to tell. The bookstore was intimate, its walls covered in murals of queer icons. The crowd was diverse, from teens clutching copies of Light in the Shadows to older couples holding hands. Miles felt a pang of pride, despite everything. His story, however it had been shared, was reaching people. But tonight wasn't about Clara's book. It was about closure. Clara took the stage, her voice softer than before. She read a new passage, one she hadn't shared on the tour. A letter she'd written to Miles, apologizing for her actions. "I failed you," she read, her voice trembling. "But your courage has taught me what it means to truly listen." Miles, standing in the back with Javier, felt a lump in his throat. For the first time, he saw Clara not as the villain, but as a flawed woman trying to make amends. When the Q&A began, he stepped forward, his heart steady. "I'm Miles Carter," he said, the now familiar words carrying a new weight. "And tonight, I want to talk about forgiveness." He spoke about the pain of Clara's betrayal, but also about the love that had always been there, imperfect but real. He spoke about finding his voice, about the people, like Javier, like the teens in the audience who'd shown him he wasn't alone. "This book wasn't my choice," he said, "but this moment is. I'm choosing to move forward, to tell my story on my terms." The crowd rose in a standing ovation, and Clara stepped down from the stage, tears streaming down her face. She hugged Miles, a fierce, trembling embrace. "I'm so proud of you," she whispered. Miles hugged her back, the knot in his chest loosening. "We've got work to do," he said. "Together." After the event, Miles and Javier slipped out to a quiet cafe in the Castro. Over coffee, Javier reached for his hand. "You did it," he said. "You took your story back." Miles smiled, his fingers intertwining with Javier's. "We did it. I couldn't have done this without you." Javier's eyes sparkled. "So, what's next for Miles Carter?" Miles laughed, the sound light and free. "I'm thinking maybe I'll write my own book. The real story." Javier grinned. "I'll design the cover." The weeks after the tour were a whirlwind. Miles returned to Seattle, but he wasn't the same man who'd left. He started writing, pouring his experiences into a new manuscript. One that was his from start to finish. Javier moved in with him, their tiny apartment now filled with sketches and half-written pages, a testament to their shared dreams. Clara, true to her word, worked with Miles to revise Light in the Shadows, adding his perspective and donating the proceeds to queer youth organizations. Their relationship wasn't perfect, but it was healing, built on honesty and hard-won trust. One evening, as Miles and Javier sat on their balcony, watching the Seattle skyline glow against the dusk, Miles felt a peace he hadn't known before. "I used to think my story was about pain," he said, his voice soft. "But it's about love. All of it." Javier leaned over, kissing him gently. "That's the story I want to read." A year later, Miles stood in Pages and Pride, the bookstore where it all began. The shelves were now lined with his own book, Reclaiming Light, a raw, honest account of his journey. Not just the coming out, but the tour, the betrayal, the love he'd found with Javier, and the reconciliation with Clara. The launch event was packed, the crowd spilling onto the street, a testament to the community that had rallied around him. Javier stood beside him, holding his hand, his pride palpable. Clara was there too, in the front row, her eyes shining with tears of joy. Miles took the mic, his voice steady and strong. "This book is for everyone who's ever felt like their story wasn't theirs to tell," he said. "It's for the kids still scared to come out, for the families learning to listen, for the friends who show up when it matters most." He looked at Javier, then at Clara, and finally at the crowd. "My story started with pain, but it ends with hope. Because love, real, messy, beautiful love, always finds a way." The crowd cheered, and Miles felt a weight lift, a final release of the anger and hurt that had once defined him. After the signing, he and Javier slipped out to the bookstore's back patio, where a wooden bench sat under a string of fairy lights. They sat close, their shoulders touching, the night air cool against their skin. "You did it," Javier said, his voice warm. "You wrote your truth." Miles smiled, leaning into him. "We wrote it, together." As they sat there, the city humming around them, Miles realized his story wasn't just his anymore. It was a beacon for others, a reminder that even the deepest betrayals could lead to something beautiful. He'd taken back his narrative, not just from Clara, but from the fear and shame that had once held him back. And with Javier by his side, he knew the next chapter would be even brighter.